Welcome. Take two.
Welcome to the Bar is Ankle High, episode 74.
You gonna make your noise?
Pew, 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 pew.
There we go.
The weekly ADHD podcast that explores life's low bars with wit and wisdom. Quick reminder, you can join our Patreon for ad-free episodes if you hate ads. We like them because it allows Garet mostly to live her dream of not having to work for the man ever again.
I would love that. Right now, I'm just working for the tiny girl and two tiny men. My dogs.
Oh, I forgot about your second dog. It's like you really shouldn't call your husband a tiny man.
No.
He's gonna be so mad when he hears this.
Just really tiny, bossy little creatures in my house, dictating my every move all day long.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Garet.
I'm Katie.
And we're both drinking wine tonight while we record because it's been one of those days.
Yeah, it's a Friday and I worked all day.
Do we have any housekeeping items?
Just that you can still join our Patreon and get ad-free episodes every week, and that is the best way to support us financially if that's something you're able to do. The other totally free way to support us is to write out a 5-star review for us on Apple Podcasts.
Write us a review.
Write us a 5-star review. Like, it takes 0.25 seconds. You can put your favorite quote from the episode you're listening to as you write it. I don't care.
You can write literally anything positive and we will just barf rainbows.
I mean, you could write anything you want as long as it's 5 stars. Like, you can write something negative if you want as long as there's 5 stars. I don't give a fuck.
Don't say that we laugh too much at nothing.
Well, you can say that, but it's not going to change what we do.
It won't change what we do, but I'll be mad about it.
Just had a whole rant about how we're going to continue to laugh at things.
It's a good point. It's a really good point.
But that's all I have for housekeeping. Okay. And also, if you join our Patreon, you did agree, Garet, that I can get frilly rhinestone pink cowgirl boots to do high kicks in if we get 100 Patreon.
Oh yeah, and I mean, ultimately, like, if this podcast grows enough, you know, we can get to the point where we're doing something like a meet and greet or, you know, like a live event, and then Katie can high kick in her frilly fringe.
They're so cool.
We are continuing our postpartum conversation today. So, postpartum anxiety. Like, the broad definition is an irrational fear or exaggerated worry that something is wrong, and usually involves like worrying all day, every day about just a rotating list of things. And obviously, you know, is linked to regular anxiety, but is more directly tied to baby related things, becoming a parent, you know, things of that nature. So I think
for it to be postpartum anxiety, it has to be like marked by anxiety about the child, or it just happens in that 4th trimester period. And then you happen to also be worrying about your kid because you have a kid now.
I don't know. I mean, so this is not something that I have struggled with. I would say I've definitely struggled more with like postpartum depression than I have with postpartum anxiety. But knowing people that have struggled with postpartum anxiety, I would say that it's definitely, it could just be that it's somebody that has anxiety pre-existing. I mean, I think that definitely is going to make you more likely to have it postpartum. But I think there's also that, like, your brain is just so, everything rotates around the baby and what's going on with the baby. Are they okay? Are they meeting milestones? Are they sick? Like, what were they exposed to? just like the Rolodex of
Yeah.
worries that you can have. And I think it's that representing as like an anxiety disorder. So it's
Okay.
going beyond your normal concerns. It says it's similar to regular anxiety, but is more closely linked with having a baby and becoming a parent. Um,
Mhm.
so it's actually that was probably at the top of my list of concern. Ironically, I was very anxious about having postpartum anxiety. I thought I was really just going to be tormented my
Mhm.
entire postpartum period. But Zoloft fixed that, so I was not
Yay.
tormented, thank God. So I think there's a lot of talk about like postpartum depression leading up to, or perinatal depression, around pregnancy and postpartum, but I don't think there is as much of a conversation about postpartum anxiety. So I think it can be a little bit more insidious,
Mm.
because I think everybody's paying attention. It's like everybody's looking over here, and I think postpartum anxiety, honestly, post COVID especially, where it always went from like, oh, being concerned about what your baby's being exposed to, going into every cold and flu season where we're looking at a trifecta of RSV, flu, and COVID. Um, it's scary.
Mhm.
It's scary. And,
Yeah.
I mean, COVID, we're still learning about the long-term effects of COVID.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that that just makes it amplifies it, but I think it also gives it an element of, like, realness. I think sometimes the issue with anxiety, like, my personal issue, speaking from experience with anxiety, is my anxious thoughts were never outlandish. They were just always worst case scenario of realistic situations.
Mhm.
So I'm not sitting there like, "Oh my god, a plane is flying overhead and is gonna crash into my house." It was always things that like, you know, what if this happens and then this happens and then this happens? And they were always like things that could happen, but it was always just worst case scenario.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that um at a time when you're dealing with all of these changes to yourself, to your relationship, to your house, to your body, and you have this new person that you are directly tasked with taking care of, and you don't speak the same language. They don't even know which way is up. It's
Yeah,
very
babies are
easy.
stupid.
Babies are babies are stupid. They don't even speak English.
Yeah.
And they like there's times we were like, "Oh my god, is this baby just having a crying jag?" Or like, "Oh my god, is something wrong? Is
Mhm.
something broken?" Or, did I set them down too hard? Or, I mean, there was one night this might get edited out because my spouse is still very upset about it. We have a very low ottoman, and the boppy was on the ottoman, and it's on a carpeted floor, so it's like a very low distance on a carpeted floor. The baby was in the boppy. He was getting a burp cloth to put on his shoulder to pick her up to feed her, and she rolled off as he was doing that. And he was just like, it was one of those, like, it happens at 2 o'clock in the morning, your brain's not working.
Right.
And he was like devastated and woke me up. He was like, "Oh my God, she fell." And I'm like, "From where?" He's like, "The ottoman." I was like, I literally looked at her. I was like, "She's fine. She's fine. It's okay."
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing, but you're in that like sleep deprivation, like, "Oh my God, what have I done?"
Oh,
So
for
I think
sure.
it's very easy to also, in a period of like isolation, where just by nature of it, you're not talking to a lot of other adults, you're spending a lot of time on your own with this baby or with your partner and this baby. I think it's very easy for those thoughts to kind of grow. So unless you're
Yeah.
really on top of it and you're really checking yourself and you're, really aware of it, which I think, like I said, people are so much more aware of postpartum depression. I think that it can really get away from you. So I can totally see how this can grow into um a much bigger thing.
Yeah, I would say even if you do have that community um of folks around you, it's easy even to say like, it's fine, she's fine, like you don't have to worry about it. And it's like, yeah, but that doesn't make my anxiety better because you're not solving the problem that I think could be a problem.
Right.
So
Right.
it's
Right.
like, you know, it's not like your anxiety is necessary. It's not being ignored completely, but it's not being satiated in a way that can actually provide you relief. And then there's the other side of it where, like, I know we said it in the first few episodes. I know I did, but it's like, of course you're feeling overwhelmed and of
Oh,
course you're
yeah.
feeling these things. But that can easily be the response to like, well, I'm just so anxious that like the formula isn't giving her everything she needs, or I'm not producing
Mm-hmm.
enough, or like if my supply dips one day because we were out and doing things and I just forgot to drink enough water and I didn't have the right things to eat, and so then my supply dipped, and just, should I be supplementing with formula that day? And so I was just like worried about it. And even my mom being like, she's fine, like she'll let you know, being like, right, but but what
Oh, yeah.
if, like what if she's not, and I won't know until it's too late. And so to
Mm-hmm.
be, even like with my mom, like she's a nurse, there's no reason for me to not, and she was a labor and delivery nurse for
Yep.
like 15 years. There's no reason for me to not trust her opinion on that.
Yep.
But that anxiety doesn't give a fuck. So like,
Right. And that's, I mean, you think about, so if you're not postpartum and you're just dealing with anxiety, if somebody tells you, if you're like, kind of spinning about something and somebody goes, well, don't worry about that for this reason, and it's just very logical, it doesn't make it go away.
right.
It turns into, no, you're just not hearing what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm concerned about is this. So I just think it's like, it's just so hard, and it's something like you can't step away from. So like if you're
Yeah.
in, like, I had a tendency to, like, I would like doom scroll and I'd be like too into the news and I would just feel like suffocated almost. I could, okay, and there was a couple times Katie had to tell me like, okay, I think it's time for a news break. Maybe let's step away from it. And I would like go out, get some fresh air, go for a walk, whatever it was, like to make me feel better. You can't do that with a baby. Like, okay, so I can
No.
step away for an hour. But
Yeah,
like,
you get the authorities called on you if you do that.
right. I used to tell people this is awful, but when people would be like, "When are you having a baby?" before we had a baby, I would tell them that when I don't want to deal with my dogs, I can put them in a kennel, and when I could do that with a baby, I would have a baby. You still can't do that with a baby, just to be clear. So,
Yeah. So that didn't change for you to get pregnant. Got it.
no,
Good to know, because
Yeah.
that would definitely make PK more on board with having a kid.
yeah, you
If
still
we could
can't do
just
that.
do that.
So around 10 to 15% of new moms suffer with postpartum anxiety, and about half of those with postpartum depression will also experience postpartum anxiety, which is like such a tormented way to live.
Yeah.
Truly.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. And so just to be clear though, you're talking about like specifically people who carried the baby and delivered it.
I'm assuming, so like, you figure all of these articles that you're reading are
Yeah.
like, they're not going to be intersectional in their addressing of people. So this says new mom, so I'm assuming whoever carried the baby,
Yeah.
who's experiencing those. I do have a section also about the other parent.
Okay.
So I'll touch on
Because I'm
that
sure
towards the
that
end.
that's a thing too,
Oh, for
like
sure.
obviously.
It happens. It's also, I want to say it's like 1 in 10.
Okay.
And again, they're saying dads. I'm just going to label that as the other partner.
Right.
So that's a lot, and the overlap between postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety is a lot.
And that's
Um,
assuming that those 1 in 10, like I would think that the number is higher than 1 in 10. It's just that if I were the person who hadn't given birth, it would be very easy for me to kind of like gaslight myself into being like,
oh yeah,
you don't need to report this. Like you are not the one struggling.
it's
Like,
hard enough, I think, as the person who did addressing it.
mhm.
I mean, like we talked about that in an earlier postpartum episode where I was like, I'm just really glad that I had already done, the overcoming the, you need to be talking to
Mhm.
somebody about this, you need to be medicated for this, because I was so medication resistant for so long, and now I'm like, oh shit, life doesn't have to be this hard. And it's made my postpartum experience without a doubt 100 times better, like night
Mhm.
and day from what it would have been.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I
So
do think that you would have really struggled with anxiety if you weren't on
oh yeah.
Zoloft.
Oh
I
yeah.
think.
I mean, I started on Zoloft for seasonal depression, but could not get over the difference it made in my anxiety. Um, and knowing how likely, because that's all I could think. And part of the reason I kind of was concerned about having a baby for so long is I was like, man, I'm going to be tormented. And that was pre-COVID. I was
Yeah.
like, I am going to be tormented by people coughing and touching hands and hands going in the mouth. And I mean, it's and, am I then going to spend every time she's visiting with someone hovering?
Mhm.
Like I don't, and it's not like I want to be that way, but when your anxiety is that peak, you can't, there's no stopping yourself. There's no regulating yourself.
For sure. I think also there's something to be said for like the first child or for folks who
Oh
struggled
yeah.
to get pregnant in the first place,
Mhm.
that like I've heard stories of people who like spent, 7 years trying to get pregnant and they finally do, and then they're like helicopter parents like to the nth degree,
Yes.
because it's that kind of thing where they're like, I can't imagine, like this wasn't just a like whoops, we got drunk on our honeymoon and now we're
Oh
pregnant.
yeah. Like we didn't
Like
think it was going to happen at all. So
exactly.
it's like
So
now
I
you
think
really don't want to fuck it up. Yeah.
right. So then like, which is like a ton of pressure, and it's the kind of thing where also I think what has helped you um has been that you did therapy well before you were contemplating getting pregnant, or
Yes.
like before you were pregnant. And so it's, those are the skills that you work on in therapy, where you learn how to articulate what is actually making you anxious. So you learn, like for the only example I have is like when we were installing the microwave and the cabinet. PK, when he was growing up, his dad just always like outsourced that. He'd always hire somebody. So he never
Mhm.
saw, like, he never helped his dad do anything like that. He never saw him like figure it out and, drill a hole that wasn't supposed to be drilled and redo it and whatever.
Mhm.
My mom just always did those projects herself. And so it doesn't, to me, doing those projects is not intimidating. It's
Mhm.
very intimidating for PK. And so when we were installing that, we first of all had to install the cabinet and like drill the holes for the hardware and all this other stuff, and then cut holes in it to install this microwave. But like, so for me, I was like, yeah, we'll like, you know, trace it and whatever, and we'll mark where the holes need to be. It's no big deal. And like he really needed me to like walk through what my plan was, because to me it was very obvious, like, oh, we'll just do it this way.
Right.
And so like one of the things that I'm very grateful for with our relationship is that we are pretty good at communicating, but it's still that kind of thing where like we had to take that time to like take a time out and say like, okay, what aren't you understanding about this next step that we're going to do? And let's make sure that we're on the same page. And a lot of times we were saying the same thing, just like in two different ways.
Which is also the big difference between being in a relationship in your early 20s
Yes.
versus your 30s,
Mm-hmm.
where you've already ironed out some of your communication issues or interpersonal issues.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing, going into a long-term relationship or moving in together or getting married or having a baby. Like you have all of these life changes that are stressful by nature, and you have to be able to like fall back on those skills to be able to get through it.
Yeah.
And I think about like, my awareness of mental health. Like there's periods of time where I was experiencing super high anxiety and I didn't even see it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like the fact that I became a mom into my 30s instead of, 25, I was way better equipped to
Yeah.
kind of keep myself even, cuz I mean, and part of like going into parenting is being able to teach emotional regulation And for somebody that struggled with emotional dysregulation for so many years, it's one of those like, oh no, this is not just fly by the seat of your pants. Like, this has to be very deliberate. So going through this phase, it's like sometimes you're looking at yourself with a mirror, because you are starting to have that realization of like, oh, I have this little person that's going to be learning how to live for me. I need to be able to show them how to do this without freaking out. So if I'm
Yeah.
freaking out over everything, and that's, one of my spouse's phrases that he uses a lot is like, if everything's an emergency, nothing's an emergency.
Yeah.
So if you're treating everything like it's 911, nothing's urgent, because everything's urgent. Like you take away that sense of urgency, like a boy that cried wolf almost.
Yes.
Um
Well, and if you're already starting at a level 9,
oh yeah.
then the only
Yeah.
the only place to go is to 10. And so then it's like, it's almost for a child, it's impossible to differentiate
Yes.
how important something might be
Or
to my
what a one
parents.
is.
Right.
I mean, it's so I
And
just
then,
think
yeah,
it's
the one ends up seeming like you're completely detached and, despondent rather than just like
calm.
existing. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I definitely think it's like, obviously, like a huge crux of this whole podcast is like, hey, it's important to address things and take care of yourself and prioritize taking care of those things, because like you have to be functional in your daily life.
Yes.
And something like this postpartum anxiety, if you're at the point where everything is causing you to panic, everything is triggering a panic attack, it's just not a way to live. Like, I mean, the symptoms of this are a sense of dread or danger, racing thoughts, a persistent feeling of being on edge, like something's about to go terribly wrong, excessive worry about baby's health, development, or safety, an overwhelming sense of burden, stress, and concern about the ability to be a good parent, a persistent case of the jitters or a constant agitated feeling, insomnia and trouble sleeping even though you're exhausted, um like racing heartbeat, rapid breathing, things like that, chest pain, nausea, dizziness, shaking, and chills or hot flashes. That's a awful way to be existing, on top of the sleep deprivation of having a new baby and all of the other things that are happening that are your baseline as a new parent that are like unavoidable. To
Mm-hmm.
deal with all of that on top of it, that just sounds like torment, like absolute torment.
Oh,
Um,
truly, it's like against the Geneva Convention. Like
it should be
but
illegal. Yeah.
I know that we mentioned her before in this series, but I just am reminded of Brooke Shields because all
Yes.
I remember about her interview was that she said she kept having this thought, like this intrusive thought basically, where like she was like, what if I pick up the baby and throw it through the plate glass window?
Oh, every
And
time I walk down the stairs with the car seat, I'm like, what if I accidentally throw the car seat and the baby's in it?
yeah.
Like,
And it's the kind of thing where it's
what?
like, right, like the intrusive thought where you're like, why would I throw my and like
Yes.
and she said in the interview, she's like, obviously I wouldn't do that, but that was like I was picturing it. And so I
Mm-hmm.
was afraid to pick up my kid because I was afraid I would do that. And then they were telling me that I wasn't bonding with my child because I was afraid to pick her up. And like that's not what was happening. What was happening is that I was like trying to keep her safe and like trying to make the responsible choice, but because I was so unsure and like you were
Right.
like she was living in that nth degree level 10 anxiety spot where she was like, that's definitely going to happen. Like she couldn't talk herself out of, I'm not going to throw my kid through a window because there's no
Yeah.
reason for that to happen. Like in order for that to happen, like, I don't even know. Like I in this moment can't fathom a sequence of events that would lead to me throwing anyone through a plate glass window beyond like the building is on fire and I know someone's out there to catch her. I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
but even then it's like the building's on fire and like what else are you going to do? It's that or burn to death. So like
Yeah.
you might as well take your shot. But it's just one of those things where like that's that sort of thing that like it just lives rent free in my head is her saying that she had this image of her doing this and like trying to explain to whoever, Barbara Walters or whatever, that she was like, of course I was never going to do it. But I couldn't figure out why I kept worrying about that.
Oh yeah.
Because
What
she's
if,
like, I was a normal
or I'm
person.
like, I'm putting something in the dishwasher. It's like, what if I drop the baby onto the tray of the dishwasher? Like, it's and I mean, intrusive thoughts happen. They're normal. Sure. New parent worry is normal. Like, to be concerned, like, are they meeting their milestones? Or, it feels like she's getting a fever. Is she getting sick? Oh, she's crying a lot. Like, I wonder what's going on. Like, those are normal thoughts. But when you go from, these normal thoughts to something that's more extreme and like really not, I don't want to say like not based in reality, but it's not based on a real threat.
Right.
When you're just like spinning, if you're terrified that this baby's like not meeting milestones when you're going to the pediatrician and the pediatrician saying, hey, they're doing great, you have nothing to be worried about. They're meeting milestones, they're eating okay, they're growing the way they're supposed to be. Every time they cry, you're like convinced that they're in terrible pain, when in reality, like, crying is how a baby communicates.
Right.
Or, you can't stop yourself from constantly staring at them to make sure they're breathing because you're that terrified of SIDS. It's you're going from, normal new parent concerns to definitely, you're starting to look at this like, oh, sorry. You're definitely starting to look at this like this postpartum anxiety realm. Because, normal like new parent concerns, okay, I'm noticing like these few things. I'm going to make note of them and I'm going to bring them to the pediatrician. And I'm going to ask them about them. Like, I went in and I said to the pediatrician, can you please settle my mind and tell me that my kid's head is not super flat, because I'm convinced that her head is flat. And she looked at me and she goes, her head is not more flat than anybody else's head. She'll be fine. And that was enough. It was like something that I was concerned about for like a few weeks. She literally was like,
Doc, do we need helmets?
Yeah. And she was like, her head's fine. And I was like, okay, I accept that.
Fine.
So, and just like an example of like, talking about this postpartum anxiety and how I know that I'm in a better place than I was. Listeners, some of you may know because you may follow me on social media. My spouse got COVID and we didn't know it. And it was Christmas. And
so was he asymptomatic, or was he just kind of like, have like a cold, whatever?
So,
because you guys got a cold in the beginning of December.
So we got a cold at Thanksgiving and just like couldn't shake it. Like, we both wound up on antibiotics, but we're still like in this loop of like coughing, congestion, which is like everybody's in this time of year.
Yeah.
Everybody's got some kind of like gross.
At least in the northern hemisphere. Southern hemisphere people might be living at large right now. But.
Yeah. But I'm sure the tides will turn when the seasons change.
Oh, how the turntables.
The turntables have turned. So he came home and, we went and saw family Christmas Eve. We left Christmas Eve evening, and Christmas Day, he was like, I'm so tired. Like, I just don't feel good. I'm so congested, blah, blah, blah. And I made the grievous error of thinking he was exaggerating. I was like, yeah, hello, we've been dealing with the same symptoms. Like, join the club. Like, everybody feels shitty. That's how it is. Sorry. And he spent a couple of days like sleeping like most of the day, which is very unusual for him. So Christmas Eve was Sunday. So Monday, Tuesday, he slept most of the day, really wasn't feeling good. He left and went into work on Wednesday. And I woke up very tired on Wednesday, and I was like, man, like all day just like dragging, and felt like I was getting sick. And I thought, okay, so maybe he got exposed to something else and he gave me this cold. And now I'm like seeing extended family.
Right.
And I was keeping my distance. I was like, hey, I feel like I'm getting a cold. I don't feel great. So I'm just going to like keep my distance from everybody. I noticed that I was very fatigued and the baby was sleeping a lot and she felt warm. And I was like, we're probably just fighting something off, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That night, he got back from work and I was like, I think I have a fever. I really don't feel good. She feels like she has a fever. So we took her temp. She was like 101 and change. Gave her some Tylenol, gave her a cool bath, like got her. I was like, okay, fever came right back down. Put her to bed. We were good. She woke up 3 hours later with like almost 103 fever. I was at almost 103 and we stayed that way for like a day and a half. And
Woof.
I called the pediatrician at like 10 o'clock, 10:30 at night. And I was like, she's really sick. Like we're both sick, but she's just screaming. Like for a baby that normally just kind of hangs out, she was screaming to the point where she was crying so loud. I had my phone on ring and I didn't hear the pediatrician call me back. I missed her call because she was just screaming. And the congestion with COVID is so bad that we're like sucking out her nose, sucking out her nose, sucking out her nose. So then she's like screaming. So it's just like this awful loop of trying to deal with her symptoms, but also trying not to make her cry too hard because then it just makes the congestion so much worse.
Right.
So we're in this loop of with these symptoms, and I get a call back from the pediatrician's office at like 9 o'clock in the morning. They're like, hey, she tried to reach you. She couldn't reach you. Like, we're just checking in to make sure you're okay. And I was like, we're not okay. We feel awful. Like, we were literally going to pack up and go home and try and get her seen. And the nurse was like, I'm going to need you to take a COVID test first. She's like, I think you have COVID. And I was like, we don't have COVID. That's ridiculous. Fine, we'll test before we come in. And we took a test, and my spouse and I were both positive. I was like, motherfucker.
You don't nasal swab a baby, right?
Yeah, so the assumption, they were like, just do yours, and if you're positive, we're just going to assume she's got it too, because there was like no way.
Do they just assume that because of your personal habit of coughing into your baby's open eyes? Is that where she learned it from?
Yeah. I warned Katie. We were supposed to see each other earlier in the week, and I was like, hey, this baby has a habit of coughing into your open mouth, so you may want to wait. And ultimately, like, we wound up super, super sick from like Wednesday to like Saturday morning.
Mm-hmm.
And we eventually, like, the fever went away, and now we just.
So at that point on Wednesday morning is when your spouse tested positive?
No, we tested at the same time Thursday morning. So
and
he
that's
had
when
been
he tested
sick
positive
since Monday.
Right.
And
I thought he didn't test positive until the following Tuesday when we were supposed to meet, and that's why
he
was
kept
Visine on himself.
He's been testing.
Gotcha.
He's continued to test to see if he's testing negative, which he hasn't been. Because like our attitude was like, okay, we're either going to be testing negative or we're not going to be symptomatic before we're going out and seeing people.
Right.
Like one of the two. And at this point, like, it's just lingering like fatigue and congestion, which is that's exactly what happened to me last time I had COVID. My fever was very high. I mean, for an adult to have like a 102.9 fever is very high.
That's what mine was with my second shot and my first round of the COVID shots. And I mean, I was shaking so bad I could almost not get the thermometer into my mouth because I was shaking so bad from the chills. And it was the kind of thing where it just like rocks your world. Like it's just wild when like in Fahrenheit, okay? Like you think about it and it's like 5 degrees.
Yes.
Which like in all other things isn't very much, but like I mean, it's just nuts to me like when you think about like what's it called? Homeostasis.
Yeah.
Like it's just nuts that like that little makes such a difference.
Oh yeah.
Because like
I mean,
really at like 101, I think the reason like no nurse really gives a shit unless you're over 101 is because it's like 1 degree Celsius.
Mm-hmm.
Or more than 1 degree Celsius, I think. So
yeah, because they don't even like medically, it's not
in the rest of the world. It's
you're like
whatever
over 100.4.
Right.
Yeah. It was, and I kept saying to my my mom, I was like, I have not had a fever. The only time I had a fever like this was the flu and COVID. I was like, so I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And then, sure enough, we wind up with COVID, which we then gave to my parents and one of my family members. So we had our own super spreader event accidentally.
Happy birthday.
But like I mean the brain fog that goes with COVID, and I mean just being sick and having a high fever in general, but the brain fog with COVID is so bad that my mom, my spouse, and I are sitting there like troubleshooting, like, okay, like what is our plan? Because she won't sleep, she won't lay flat, like she'll sleep but only on you sitting up, because I'm sure the congestion was so bad that laying her down was uncomfortable.
Or if she had, like, I mean, I would imagine the pressure in your head.
Oh yeah.
Like when I have like a sinus headache and I go to lay down, it's like I feel like my eyes are about to pop out of my head.
And when I get COVID, like I get such serious congestion that like I was closing my mouth. I was so full. It was creating like suction almost. I was like choking on stuffy head. It was just gross. So I think that looking at that, I'm like, okay, I was able to like I mean, not well. We didn't do well. And I literally had to look at my mom, my spouse, and I was like, I can't think to make a decision right now. I can't get us through this. Like I can't think straight. Like I can't process. I don't know what to do. Like my only answer was I'm going to stay up all night and I'm just going to have her on me. And I'll just sit and like watch TV or something and stay awake. And the two of them were like, that's not reasonable. You are also sick.
Right.
And you need to sleep.
Also not reasonable to expect that you would have been able to stay awake that whole time.
For sure wouldn't have been able to. I was like,
yeah.
I was like dead man walking, like
under the best of
so
circumstances.
Yeah. But in my head, I'm like, I don't know what else to do. So this is the only answer. But I'm like, I know that if this was like me not medicated, if myself and my baby were away from home, exposed to all of these people, like, we had 2 family events like within a few days apart. And we were super sick. Like we were out in the woods, like we weren't near like a major hospital. And I was like, man, I probably would have had a panic attack. Like when I think back now, like to where my anxiety was, like I would not have been able to handle it. So
Oh, for sure. I mean, and it's not an unreasonable concern when you think like, I mean, especially if it was just you, your spouse, and the baby, and you didn't have extra family to like help. But I mean, that's a reasonable concern. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I like living where we live, is that in 30 minutes I can be in a hospital by myself. Like that's not even with calling an ambulance or anything.
Right.
Like I can be in a hospital in less than that where I live now. I can be in a hospital in 10 minutes if I needed to. So it's the kind of thing where, when you're far away from that convenience, I guess, it's easy to be like, what would I do? Like, I mean, we're near the Adirondacks, and how many people have, go missing or die because they can't get care fast enough because it's so remote.
Oh, yeah. And I was like, I'm thinking to myself, like, when we're home, we've got a pediatric emergency room less than 10 minutes from us. So
right.
The fact that I was able to like talk myself down, and I talked to the pediatrician's office, like I mean, I must have talked to them the first 24 hours. I probably talked to them like 3 times.
Right.
Like,
but that's what they're there for.
Right. I called them back. Hey, we're positive. They came up with a game plan with me over the phone, like told us what to pick up at the pharmacy, what to look for, like techniques for things. So things operated exactly the way they were supposed to.
Which also, like, thank God, though, this didn't happen in like April 2020.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I was
even if you were medicated.
Oh, yeah.
They wouldn't have been able to troubleshoot this,
Yes.
like, so.
Yes. So it was just like a really crazy, and at the end of it, obviously it was like very scary, and the two of us were like, oh my God, thank God that's over. Like we got through that, and everybody was okay. But like in the thick of it, I'm thinking back now and I'm like, okay, like I would not have handled that the way I did if I was not medicated and if my anxiety was not managed. And there's like no one cause of postpartum anxiety. Like, obviously, we've talked about just like postpartum depression. You've got hormonal shifts. We talked about how extreme that is at 24 hours.
Yeah,
I
fucking
mean,
wild.
just
I still
it
like
yeets you right into
yeah, like Brooke
a mental
Shields,
health crisis.
that cliff just like lives in my head rent free because it just like it I understand why it happens. Like the biological mechanics of the drop off makes sense to me. Like the placenta's gone. Okay, fine. I get
Mhm.
it. But the why makes no sense.
It's terrible.
Like the how makes sense. It's just the why where it's like, what the fuck, dude? Like evolutionarily, millions of years, and we haven't just like, I don't know, done better. Like, I don't
Oh,
know.
I mean,
Like it's just so uncalled for.
and how many, thousands of years have women been giving birth to babies and dealing with this? I'm like, this is
I mean, the fact that like we did this in caves with nothing,
no,
and the race, like the human race survived at all, or like Neanderthals survived long enough to create
no.
uh humans. Like it's the kind of thing where it just blows my mind, but it goes to that Jurassic Park quote, like life will find a way. And it's just like, I guess, like what other explanation is there? Because
Yeah,
there's
life
no
life
like
found its way right into an epidural because what the fuck?
I mean, like, but realistically, it's like, okay, so like, let's say, because I don't think that we can say that it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, you did the research, but I don't think there's any evidence that this is like a modern phenomenon for
No.
anxiety depression. Like, there's no indication that this hormone drop off is since like the Middle Ages or something. Like,
Nope.
this isn't something that we've only just started experiencing. So then you think of like how many, what, thousands, millions of women took themselves out of the equation. Like how many people took their own lives or took the lives of themselves and their kids because
Yeah.
they had these thoughts and these worries and these concerns. And even if it's like, well, I'm worried that this wolf is going to come into our cave and eat my baby, so in order to prevent that, I'm going like it. I mean, we still see those types of deaths and murder suicide situations today. um but like even in like the Stone Age, like
Yeah.
it's just that kind of thing. Like how many times did that happen where it just happened because they had, other than the idea of it being like a community thing where you have people around you to say, you're okay, we can help, tell us what the problem is, and we'll come up with a solution. Like, what are you worried about? Like, we'll have somebody stand watch so that nobody can get into your cave
Yep.
or whatever, you know, and you have that sort of group surrounding you and helping to protect you and mentally or and physically, you know. But I think it is
Mhm.
that mental safety net where, you know, it's sort of like, I don't want to have to preface, and I don't think at this point, like you said, you know, that's the difference with having kids in your 30s. Like I don't think that I really have to preface with the group that I have around me between my family and PK's family and like you and my other friends. I wouldn't have to preface with like, okay, I know this sounds crazy, but like, I think I could just say, yeah, things are going well, but I keep thinking about blah, 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 blah. So I'm working on that or
Right, and
whatever.
every other parent, every other mom would be like, "Oh, yeah, I remember when, I kept thinking about this."
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
it's I mean, you combine, like, that hormone change, the sleep deprivation, the stress of, like, taking care of this baby that, like, the stakes are so high.
Well, and this is
Like,
also,
you
you know, assuming like people, like we're pretty well situated with our jobs. Like,
Mhm.
you don't have to go back to work.
Right.
Like, you're not worrying about juggling work and making sure that like you're performing at work right now
Yep.
and performing well enough if you're in like a supervisory role or
Yep.
you were, you know,
Or a high stress job or
right.
I
Even if
mean
you don't have a high stress job, you know, plenty of people are back to work by now
oh, yeah.
and
Yeah, yeah.
who have had kids. So, um, you know, it's that kind of thing where like then you add that into it because then it's like, well, I can't miss any time from work because I used it all for my maternity leave
Because we're a
or
shithole country.
right. So like I can't afford my bills if I don't go back to work, or I
Yeah.
lose my health care if I don't go
Yeah.
back to work, or
Which, side
whatever.
note, part of the reason Garrett's taking such an extended maternity leave is because there's no fucking daycare.
Mhm.
There's no daycare to be found. I'm on like, I don't know, 6 or 7 waiting lists that I
For
got on
under
in February
of last year. Yeah.
of last year,
I mean,
and
I
I
know
am
this
not
comes
gonna
out in
have it.
January, but still.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, I'm 11 months. I got on daycare waiting list 12 months before I needed daycare, and
Yes.
I am not gonna have daycare until the summertime.
Right. Well, and it's because she'll be under a year, right? So, like, once she's a year, then it's easier to find daycare?
18 months.
Oh,
So with
okay.
New York State, they're considered infant, and like the ratios that they have to have in the rooms.
Mhm.
Um, it's like 4-1, I think.
Okay.
They have that until 18 months, and then once you hit toddler stage,
Right.
your options open up because it's less expensive. More places take toddlers than take babies, so you definitely have more options. But like in the meantime,
But getting to that point,
what
like,
what the
yeah.
fuck? I mean, and it's extra frustrating because I didn't procrastinate. I didn't put this off. I took care of it, like, in first trimester.
Well, and we don't live in an area where there's a lack of daycares. Like, it feels like there is because
Yeah.
there obviously isn't
A
enough, I
lot have
guess.
closed, and I think COVID
Mhm.
really, kind of fucked up the whole, like, waiting
Oh, for
list
sure.
process.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of them were telling me last year was, "Hey, we're still, like, playing catch up from COVID." But now when I'm talking to places, it sounds like the last 6 months, they've really done a lot to, like, clean up their wait list, so they're making
Okay.
sure that, like, people that keep declining are coming off and whatever else, but, I mean, it's still I was calling around like, "Hey, I just wanna check and see our status," and universally, everybody's telling me the summertime. And I'm sitting there like, "I'm supposed to go back in a month."
Mhm.
So it's I think, like, you know, things like postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety are exacerbated by a society in the United States that is not geared towards any type of support for new parents. Like,
Mhm.
childcare is a problem, time off for, you know, having a baby, for recovering from having a baby, for pregnancy is a problem. Um, healthcare is a problem. The healthcare that you get when you're in the hospital is a problem. We have a very high maternal and infant mortality rate. Um,
Especially for women of color.
yes. So it's just like it's like built to fail.
Mhm.
So you think about like things that exacerbate those feelings. What is it? What's that meme where it's like gestures vaguely
Yeah.
around? Like, yeah, of course. Like, of course, all of these things are gonna add to your symptoms. You've got, you know, things like social media that are, you know, you're seeing everybody's highlight reel, and it makes you feel like, you know, you're not doing a good enough job.
Mhm.
You know, when people are like very type A and maybe are more high strung to begin with, you're going to be more likely to suffer from these symptoms. If you've got a history of anxiety or panic attacks, which find somebody that doesn't have a history of anxiety. I mean, I would say most of the people I know at some point have struggled with anxiety.
Yeah.
Um, if you have a personal or family history of something like mood disorders, previous miscarriage or stillbirth, having a premature baby or a baby with health issues, like, I mean, a lot of these are things that you can't control. A lot of these
Yeah.
are things that it's just what happens that are contributing factors to this. So, um, obviously, with so many of these things being unavoidable, you can't control the reaction that your body and mind has to these factors. The only thing that you can deal with is like the outcome. So, you know, if you're dealing with these things, because there's no definitive timeline on postpartum anxiety. So, you know, if if you're not dealing with the symptoms that you're feeling, which are all, like we said, valid, just like the postpartum depression, valid shit that people are feeling, I mean, you can be dealing with this like indefinitely.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've had moderate anxiety for like ever. And as we said, medication made such a huge improvement to like my quality of life on a daily basis. Whoa. Like, who the fuck wants to deal with this?
Oh, for sure. Like I
Ever.
said, I mean, for me, when I went on anxiety meds, the first time it was really to help me cope with my PTSD. But it was the kind of thing where, like, I didn't realize that I was fumbling around in the dark until the medication, like, let me find the dimmer switch and I could
Yeah.
turn on the fucking light again.
Or like that
And
movie Pleasantville, where it's like black and
mhm,
white. And then, like, as the movie goes on, like, color starts being introduced. And then suddenly you're like, oh, shit. It's like, how many times, like, have we joked about, on this podcast, like, medicating, being like, wait a minute. This is how everybody else is all the time? I've been dealing
yeah.
with this? And that's totally how it feels. You're like, "Oh, shit. I didn't have to live that way." Um,
Mhm.
and I think that has just been, like, that's been a huge takeaway, and I've said it on this podcast, I don't know, 10,000 times. I've said it in my personal life at least a million times, like, wow, I am so fucking glad I went on medication when I did, because
Yeah.
it has made a huge difference in my quality of life on a daily basis, but also, like, my ability to, like, be present as a mom,
Mhm.
and my ability to, like, think clearly, to make sound decisions, to approach something from a place of calm, like, those are things that ultimately are gonna have a huge impact on my child, because
Mhm.
I'm able to approach things from, like, a place of regulation instead of a place of panic all the time.
Right.
Um
Yeah. It gives you the also, like, the space you need to be able to participate in life.
Oh,
Like,
for sure.
like, you make plans with people. That's
Yes.
huge.
Yes. I
Not that,
definitely.
like, you were a hermit before. Like, I don't
No,
mean
but,
for
like,
it to
I mean,
sound that way.
new
But,
baby,
like, yeah,
I would
exactly.
have been, like, terrified, and I mean, I will still, like, "Hey, if you're sick, please keep it to yourself." Totally not looking to go back into the loop of illness that we've been in for the last month, because it's been, the worst. The absolute worst.
Pills, baby.
So there's postpartum anxiety, there's also postpartum OCD, which is
Oh.
a type of anxiety disorder that affects specifically new new parents, new moms, with illogical, intrusive, and scary thoughts about their babies. Um, and that's where you're looking at things like, accidentally or intentionally hurting the babies, like thoughts about that. Living with these intrusive thoughts all the time, which is a lot of like what Brooke Shields was talking about.
Mhm.
Um, and again, like, obviously, there's always new parent worry, because it is such a, new big responsibility, but, like, crossing that line from, like, these occasional intrusive thoughts, ridiculous thoughts, to these frequent, intense, and, like, really distressing
Mhm.
intrusive thoughts, as
And
well
is
as hmm,
Go ahead. I w
like, the compulsive, like, the rituals.
Oh,
So,
that was gonna be my question.
yeah, like,
'Cause, like,
waking
is
up
that
every
what
hour
kind
and
of
checking on
makes
them.
it OCD versus just
Mhm.
anxiety, is, like, having these repetitive tasks or, like you said, rituals in order to satisfy the anxiety or, like, protect the baby or whatever that.
And I think there's a lot of overlap between the 2, and I think it is a little fuzzy sometimes to distinguish the 2 from each other, and there is also postpartum psychosis, um, but I think the determining factor definitely between the psychosis and the OCD is that you wouldn't act on the intrusive thoughts. You're just having compulsive intrusive thoughts. Um,
The OCD is not acting.
right, the
Okay.
psychosis is when you're acting on it.
Okay.
Um, I mean, the good thing is it's very similar to, the postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, that it is something that can be easily treated, um, both medicinally and, with cognitive behavioral therapy. Um, so like we were saying, I mean, these are highly treatable things. It's really just taking that step of talking to your provider and then following through and troubleshooting what's going to work the best for you. So, if you're feeling the excessive worry, the fear, the dread, overwhelmed, panicked, out of control, it's worth talking to your primary or to your baby's pediatrician, your OBGYN. And there's like screenings that they can do, just like they do with regular depression, just like they do with anxiety, with ADHD. They can do a screening just to kind of do a temperature check to see how you're feeling and what you're struggling the most with.
Did you mention your concerns about postpartum anxiety and depression to your providers while you were pregnant?
I don't think so, because I was already medicated at that point. I think if I was not medicated, I'd be more concerned. But like knowing that I was going into it from a place of like, okay, if I need to like up this medication or whatever, I can. And I was already planning, like in the back of my mind, it was like, I think when she's born, I need to go back to my full dose if I haven't already. So even like moderate to severe cases, they're going to do the same like therapy and medication, usually SSRIs. And they're generally considered safe for pregnancy and breastfeeding, chest feeding. But also, if you've got this going on, having a supportive atmosphere where you're honest about these feelings, you're talking to the people in your life about these feelings. I can't tell you how many times they've been like, the first fever that the baby got, I had the fever initially. She didn't have a fever yet, and I was like literally masking. I'm like sitting away from her because I was like, I don't know the best way to approach this. I had like, I don't even know how many separate conversations happening with all of these different moms. Like, okay, what do I do? Do I just like fling myself into this and hope everybody gets it and everybody gets sick and is miserable at the same time? But then all I could think was, does that mean I'm going to be taking care of everybody when I'm feeling like booty and I have a fever also? So yeah, I would say utilizing support systems is just as important as, well, I'm going to say medication is the most important thing. In my experience, medication has been number one.
Yeah,
But
I don't think that you
utilizing
need to
support
raw
systems,
dog it unless
no.
you have like true barriers to care.
Yeah.
It's just that thing that we've said before, like, why suffer if you don't have to?
It's and you read some of these symptoms and you're like,
And you don't have to suffer. That's
right,
like,
it is suffering. Like,
yes.
you're taking something, where it's like easy peasy lemon squeezy and it's like difficult, lemon difficult. Like, you're already dealing with lemon difficult.
Yes.
Why are you willing to suffer so much on top of that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're already going to be plagued with like intrusive thoughts and questioning things that you do. And I know like one of the things I've had to catch myself is I try not to like overly read research. I try not to overly read anecdotes about things because I found myself getting very overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
So unless I have a problem with something, I don't research it. I try and just go with like what instinctually makes sense to me, what seems to make sense for her. And then if that's not working, then I will research it, has been my rule for myself, because man, the amount of information that's out there is like great, but it's also suffocating.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, like, talk about doom scrolling. That's like doom scrolling at the Olympics to have to
Yes.
like look up, you know, because
Everything.
like there is so much information and there's so many different fucking opinions on everything.
Yes.
And a lot of it is an opinion. It's like, well, this worked for my kid, so you should do it this way. And it's like, I mean, I guess I'll try it, but it's also that sort of thing where I think I don't know if it's like something that people, our parents have said to us, and that's where I picked this up, or if it was from like Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman or some bullshit. But like, the idea that like you have those maternal instincts and like they'll kick in and you'll figure it out, and it's not like you don't have to, like, yeah, there's Dr. Spock and what to expect when you're expecting, but like beyond basic info of like, yeah, hard, solid foods around this time, or, teeth should be coming in around here. So if you have, it'll present like a fever and like fussiness or whatever, and pulling at the ears, and, like little things like that, where it's like, okay, good information to have. But I think it is, especially with ADHD, you can hyper focus on that really quick. And we don't have, that's the thing with hyper focusing. We don't have any control over when we hyper focus.
No.
So it's the kind, like, you could very easily end up in a really cursed rabbit hole of, heavy quotations information, and really work yourself up over something that you don't need to be working yourself up over.
Well, and like I also kind of had a rule for myself where I was only going to focus on what was right in front of me. So when I was pregnant, no, I did not have a plan for how I was going to introduce solids.
Mm-hmm.
Because like, why the fuck? I have enough things to be worried about. I was like, I just need to get through like labor and the first 4 weeks of postpartum.
Mm-hmm.
That's all that's in front of me right now. Like, it's the only thing I'm focusing for. And then I got through that and it was like, all right, so what do I need to be focused on between like now and 3 months? And then it's like bite-sized pieces, because there's just so much, like, as long as you know the basics, like, safe sleep basics, and like, you know, how to avoid a clogged duct, like things like that.
Yeah.
That are really going to like get you through. Your pediatrician's going to kind of guide you. Like, I know I've said before, I've known my pediatrician for, I don't know, at this point, 20 plus years. She's just guiding me through things. So I talk to them and they're like, hey, you're doing everything that you can do. And if you're really concerned, bring her in. And I go in and they're like, you know what? I think she's okay. We'll do this just in case, or, whatever it is. I think that it's so easy to get overwhelmed at a time when you're already feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Whew. Trusting your instincts, I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I'm normally like, I will research something usually heavily before I do it. Like, I try and get a good idea of something.
Podcast, yeah.
Whew. But man, it is so easy. Like, especially like I would start reading on Reddit and I would get overwhelmed because
those fucking birth plans on Reddit are wild. If you want to, if you're like me, folks, and you aren't in the world of having a kid right now, there's a subreddit called Shit Mom Groups Say, and people will post, screenshots of mom groups on Facebook where these people have their just on a different planet birth plans. Like nobody's allowed to talk to the mother. Like there was one I saw where it was like, no one's separating, like the mom has to be the one to like finish delivering the baby, like pull it out.
Oh, that's a very
oh my God.
like controversial thing. And when I was meeting with my doula, she's like, do you have a birth plan? And I was like, I want to show up. I would like to leave at the same time as the baby, alive, with 2 holes. I wanted a separate vagina and beehole.
Okay.
Those were my. I
you
just
didn't
wanted
want a fistula?
2 holes. No.
I'm
and
so
she
glad
looked
I got
at me,
that word in.
I know, you're so happy with yourself.
He's
she looked at me
so
and she
mad.
was like, we can have higher standards than that. And I was like, can we? She was like, yes.
You're there just putting down like a trash bag, like a contractor bag on the floor.
Yes.
Like, this is fine.
Just leave me here. I'll it's okay. And really, like, my birth plan, I was like, just explain things to me. Ask me before you do them. Like, I just want to take it one step at a time. I don't want to get like ferried through this process where I feel like I was totally out of control. Like, give me some semblance of control. And unfortunately, like, I had a very good experience as far as that. Like, everything was very consent based.
Yeah.
So everything was discussed before it was done. I was given the opportunity to think about things, like talk about things, ask questions. So I was very fortunate in that way. But yeah, some of the birth plans are unhinged. Like,
it's
even
just
one of the few things I had was like, can you not not that anybody really wants to know this, but I was like, can you not shave my pubes? Because it's just itchy and I don't want to have to like deal with that on top of all the other postpartum recovery. And my doula was like, they may have to, like, if it comes to a C-section, like they may need to shave. They didn't, but she was like, just be aware. And then I had somebody to like look through and be like, hey, I think that this is reasonable. And I don't think you're asking too much. And these are all like completely, and everybody that came in, like the nurses were like, oh, do you have a birth plan? They looked at it, they were like, yeah, this is fine. I'll make sure that everybody's got a copy. So it's,
yeah.
I was very fortunate that I had a very good experience. But I also think that people that go into it with this like very combative attitude, it turns into like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like when you're going into it, like, fuck around and find out. Or
Yeah.
you can just, ask questions and get a clear answer and advocate, or have somebody there. Like I was very concerned with advocating for myself, so I had people there to help me advocate for myself. And eventually I had to. They wanted to like do these other interventions and I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't.
Well, and I
wanna do that.
think, I
And
know
if I
that
have another cervical check, I'm going to scream.
we've talked about having your doula there with you and the benefit of that for you. And I think there is something to be said to what to expect when you're expecting, but like what to expect and the kind of
Yeah.
thing where it's like, they may have to shave your pubes. Like it kind of is what it is.
And I went, oh man. That's the end of the conversation. I was like, oh, that sucks.
And it's the sort of thing where like to a doctor, to your OBGYN who's like, not a single person has come to me post-birth and been like, why'd you shave my fucking pubes? I'm so miserable. That's the most uncomfortable thing about this. Like,
yeah, it was more
so
like, can we
to the
not
doctor,
add
it
to
may
my
be like, why
discomfort?
would I mention it? Because there's so many other things that you're going to have questions and be concerned with and feeling pain from that like it's not on their radar as a concern. So having somebody to just be like, yeah, I mean, we can ask, but that's
and
it may
having
have to
somebody
happen.
I could like get the anxious thoughts out with.
Yes.
To be able to like say to do like, I'm just really concerned that,
Yeah.
my anxious thoughts were like this and this and this will happen and I will die. Like that was the series of events. I was like, I just want to leave. Initially when she asked me, I was like, I want to leave alive. That's my only birth plan.
Right.
And she was like, that's sad. We can do
You're like,
better
have you
than
heard of
that.
my podcast? It's called The Bar is Ankle High. So that's really
it was
all
almost called The Bar is in Hell.
that's all I'm aiming for here is no death. I don't want to have to go casket shopping on my registry,
I don't. So I think next time we'll have a discussion because I want to do some additional research on postpartum psychosis because I know it's been in the news.
Oh, okay.
There was like that woman in Massachusetts who it was very tragic. And
Did she have like the older
she was a
child
nurse.
who
She
was
had
like 8 or something?
she had like 3 or 4 kids like in pretty rapid succession. And she took the lives of her kids and then tried to jump out the window and survived the fall. And I think she's like inpatient. It was like so tragic all the way around. And she works in that space. So to have somebody who like works in that space fall victim to that is just so sad.
Oh,
It's
Christ
sad no matter
almighty.
what.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I hadn't heard of this. So this is from October of 2023, so a few months ago.
And I think she had postpartum psychosis is what they were saying.
Yes, she was indicted in mid-September for 3 counts of murder and strangulation, allegedly attacked and killed her 3 children, ages 5, 3, and 8 months.
Yeah, I was going to say she was like
January.
newly postpartum with one of them.
Yeah, and she was a labor and delivery nurse and then attempted to take her own life, which left her paralyzed from the waist down.
That's right. And now I think she's like
Yes.
inpatient in a facility, which I mean, it
Yes,
sounds
says
like
that she remains in hospital. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in court from, from a criminal defense perspective,
Right.
They call it an insanity plea, but the reality, it looks like, Jesus, she was being prescribed Zoloft, Valium, Trazodone, Ativan, Klonopin, Prozac, and Seroquel.
Yeah.
But it was not clear that she had been given all of them at the same time. So at least there's that. But woof.
Yeah, it's
Those
just
are
like a
some
really
heavy duty drugs.
Yes, and you've got somebody who's a professional in that realm who
Yeah.
still fell victim to this. So I think it would be worth having its own conversation about. So we'll talk about the next time we have a postpartum discussion, which we just kind of have these whenever. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about postpartum depression in the other parent and some postpartum ADHD stuff. But I want to do some additional research and give it a little bit more thought. Of course, I'm saying that. God knows what could happen between now and then, considering I was not planning on getting fucking COVID in the meantime. So hopefully everybody stays healthy and stops coughing, and for the love of God, stops blowing their nose, because I can't stop doing it. And I can actually take some time to research some more.
Yeah.
Coming into it
And
with full information.
Yeah, I mean, it is very interesting, but also heavy. So I like the idea of kind of taking breaks in between.
Yeah. It is very heavy, especially I think the postpartum psychosis specifically will be very heavy.
I mean, based on this article I just found, yeah, that'll be a dark one.
Yeah. And we'll probably laugh at moments that are inappropriate, because that's kind of how we do things here.
Don't tell my coworkers.
Sorry. Can't help it. It's our coping mechanism.
Life's too short. I don't want to be miserable.
It's true, though. Life is too short, and I don't want to be miserable, and I will laugh at inappropriate times.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll pick up this kind of postpartum conversation. And I mean, obviously, if there's something we haven't covered in this, area that you want us to cover, or maybe you had a very different experience from me and my ramblings because my brain doesn't work anymore, let us know.
Yes, definitely let us know. There's a form on our website, or you can email us, or you can just shoot us a DM on Instagram. Email is probably the easiest way, because then we can actually immediately plug it into our spreadsheet, but whatever. Yeah.
Look at Katie using a spreadsheet.
Like we said at the beginning, you'll love the spreadsheet I made for our trip to Europe. You're going to really like it.
So proud. So proud.
As we said in the beginning, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/thebarisAnkleHigh to get ad-free episodes. We will maybe have some bonus episodes more regularly at some point. Who knows?
We're working on it.
But yeah, join our Patreon. We also have merch at bit.ly/anklehighmerch.
That sounds great.
And we have our new logo design is on there on a tote bag if you want that. And we'll be adding some new designs with our new logo soon. And make sure you write us out a 5-star review, Garet, and everyone else who wants to join Garet on that task. Because we're going to do it this year. We're going to make this our Garet's full-time job.
If I was an emoji right now, I'd be the little purple one with the little horns with the smile.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my...
Yeah, by full-time job, I just mean your job. But obviously we wouldn't do it full-time. I can't imagine that you would need to do this 40 hours a week. You know what I mean?
I'll be honest, I hope not.
I can't.
I don't want to do anything 40 hours a week.
I feel like if you were doing...
I hardly want to be an adult 40 hours a week.
You would have to do like 100% of everything. Like
Yeah.
all social media, all research, all like formatting and promos and editing. Like we wouldn't need our intern anymore. And that's the only way that it would end up
some
being
bad
40
news.
That's the only way it would be 40 hours a week because
Yeah.
like there's just not that much
No,
to
we're
do.
spreading it out over 3 people, so.
Yeah, unless or until we start going on tour. But
join our Patreon so we can do live events and
I can get my boots.
And Katie can get her boots and I'll increase my medication.
I'll go new boot goofing all over that stage.
New boot goofin. Should that be the episode title?
Yes.
Yeah. She did that thing. She did that face of a cat when they find prey and their pupils get really big. That's what that face was.
Ah.
So remember to be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Because
and take medication.
Anxiety's fucking hard, and you don't have to live that way. The bar's already in hell. Why make it worse?
Yeah. So take medication and don't give yourself a fistula.
And get your new boot goofing on.
Because the bar is ankle high.
Bye.
Bye.